and it's not very difficult to imagine the reason why. But another time, there lived a great singer who was called Jubal, who had no eyes. And I'm now going to tell you the reason. The name which he inherited from his father, a soldier, was Peel, and undeniably there was music in the name. But nature had also given him a strong will, which stiffened his back like an iron rod. When he was still a baby, only able to stammer a few words, he would never refer to his own little person as he, as other children were apt to do. From the very first, he spoke of himself as I. You have no I, said his parents. When he grew older, he expressed every want and desire with the words, I will. But his father said to him, you have no will. Now it was very foolish of the soldier, but he knew no better. He had learned to will only what he had been ordered to do. No young Peel thought it strange that he should be supposed to have no will when he had such a very strong one, but he let it pass. When he had grown into a strong youth, his father said to him, what trade will you learn? But the boy did not know, for he had ceased to will anything. He had been forbidden to do so. Therefore, being an obedient son, replied, I don't will anything. Then you shall be a tapster, said the father. Now, whether it's because the father knew a tapster, because mine had a particular attraction for him, is a matter of difference. It is enough to know that young Peel landed himself in the wine cellars, and it could have been a great deal worse. There was a lovely smell of sealing wax and French wine in the cellars, and they had tall altar roofs like churches, and when he sat at the casks and tapped the red wine, his heart was filled with gladness. And he sang, in an undertone at first, all sorts of tunes which he had picked up. Now his master, to whom wine spelled life, loved song and gaiety, and never dreamed of stopping his singing. He sounded so well in the cellars, and moreover it attracted customers. It was a splendid thing from the master's point of view. Now one day a commercial traveler stopped in. He had started life as an opera singer. When he heard young Peel, he was so delighted that he invited him to dinner. Now they played 9 hymns, 8 crab cakes with dill, drank punch, and above everything, sang songs. Now between 2 verses, and after they had sworn eternal friendship, the commercial traveler said, why don't you go on the stage? I, answered Peel. Well, how could I do that? All you have to do is say, I will. Now this was a new doctrine. For since his 3rd year young, Peel did not use the words I or will. He had begged his friend not to lead him into temptation. But the commercial traveler came again. He came many times, and once accompanied by a professional singer. And one evening, young Peel, after much applause from a professor of singing, took his fate into his own hands. He said goodbye to his master, and over a glass of wine, heartily thanked his friend, the commercial traveler, for having taught himself confidence and will. And he swore a solemn oath never to forget his friend, who taught him to have faith in himself. Then he went to say goodbye to his parents. I will be a singer, he said. His father glanced at the horsewhip, and his mother cried, but it was no use. Don't lose yourself, my darling boy. Now young Peel managed to earn enough money to enable him to go abroad, and there he studied singing and all the rules of the art, and in a few years' time became a very great singer indeed. He was making much money now and traveling with his own impresario. He was prospering now, and had no difficulty in saying I will, or even I command. His eye grew to gigantic proportions, and he suffered no other eyes near him. But as he was about to return to his native country, his impresario advised him that no man can be a great singer and at the same time be called Peel. He advised him to adopt a more elegant name, a foreign name by preference, but that was the fashion. Now the great man fought an inward struggle, for it is not an easy thing to change one's name. It makes it look as if one were ashamed of one's mother and father, and is apt to create a bad impression. But hearing that it was the fashion, he let it pass. He opened his Bible, for the Bible is the very best book for the purpose. And when he came to Jubal, who was the son of lament, and the father of all such as handle the harp and organ, he stopped. His impresario, who was an Englishman, advised him to call himself Mr. Jubal. Now it was all fun and games, of course, since it was the fashion, but it was nevertheless a strange thing. With the new name, Peel changed his nature. His past was blotted out. Mr. Jubal looked upon himself as an Englishman, born and bred, spoke with a foreign accent, grew stiff whiskers, in the middle of a streetcar. He hardly knew himself. Now, he was at home again now in his own country, engaged to play at the opera house. He played kings, prophets, heroes, and demons, and he was so good an actor that whenever he rehearsed a part, he instantly became the part that he impersonated. Now, one day he was strolling along the street when he heard a voice calling after him, "Pio!" But he didn't turn round, for no Englishman would do such a thing, and moreover, his name was no longer Pio. It was Mr. Jubal. But he heard the voice again, "Pio!" And then there, all of a sudden, stood his friend, the commercial traveler, in front of him. "Dear old Pio, it is you!" Mr. Jubal felt a demon in taking possession of him. He opened his mouth so wide that it showed all of his teeth, and he bellowed a curt "No!" Then his friend, feeling quite convinced that it was him, went away. The commercial traveler was an enlightened man, you see, and he knew men, himself, and the world inside out. And therefore he was neither sorry nor astonished. But Mr. Jubal thought he was. And he did what St. Peter had done. He went away and wept bitterly. Well, that is to say, he wept in his imagination, but the demon in his heart laughed. And after that, he was always laughing. At good and evil, sorrow and disgrace, at everything and everyone. Now, his mother and father knew who Mr. Jubal really was. But they never went to the opera house. They fancied it had something to do with hoops and horses and objected to seeing their son in such surroundings. But Mr. Jubal was now the greatest living singer. He had lost a lot of his eye, but he still had his will. And then his day came. There was a little ballet dancer who could bewitch men, and she bewitched Jubal. She bewitched him to such an extent that he asked whether he might be hers. What he meant, of course, was whether she would be his, but the other is a more polite way of saying it. So she took him at his word, and they were married. He taught her how to play and to sing, and gave her everything she asked for. But the sorceress always wanted the things which he most objected to giving to her, and so gradually she wrested his will from him, made him her slave. In a few years' time, Mr. Jubal had become a great singer. So great, in fact, that when the audience cried, "Jubal!" it was not Mr., but Mrs. Jubal who took the stage. And the world began to forget him. Nobody wanted to talk with him or drink with him. And when he attempted to join in the conversation, no one answered his remarks. It was almost as if he were not present, and his wife treated as an unmarried woman. Mr. Jubal grew very lonely, and in his loneliness, he began to frequent the cafes. Now, one evening, he was sitting at a restaurant, waiting for someone to talk to, and ready to talk to anybody who was willing to listen to him, when he saw his old friend, the commercial traveler, sitting at a table by himself, evidently very bored. He walked up to his friend's table and said, "Good evening." But no sooner had he spoken than his friend's face changed in such a manner that he thought he must have made a mistake. "Don't you know me? I'm Jubal." "No." "Don't you know your old friend, Pio? Pio died a long time ago." And then Mr. Jubal realized that he had, from a certain point of view, died. And he went away. On the following day, Mr. Jubal left the stage forever, and he went abroad for many years. Sadness. For he mourned for himself as for an old friend, and sorrow were fast making an old man of him. But he was glad it should be so, for he thought if I am old, then it won't last much longer. But as he didn't age quite as fast as he would have liked, he bought himself a wig with long white curls. And he felt better after that, for it disguised him so completely that he didn't know himself. Long strides, he walked the streets in a brown study. It was as if he was looking for someone or expecting someone. If his eyes met your eyes, you wouldn't ask a question of them. If you tried to make made his acquaintance, he would only talk of things and objects, and he never said I, or I find, but always, it seems. He'd lost himself. He'd given the best part of himself to his wife, for she had his will, and so he decided to go and see her. When he walked the streets in his native country, wearing his white wig, not a soul recognized him. But a musician, having been in Italy, upon passing him in the street, cried out, "There goes a maestro!" And immediately, Jubal imagined he was a great composer. He bought himself some music paper and proceeded to write a score. Well, that is to say, he wrote a series of long and short notes on the lines, some for the brass, some for the woodwinds, and the rest for the string instruments, and then sent to the conservatory. But nobody could play the music because it wasn't music, only notes. And then an artist, upon passing him on the street, who had recently been in Paris, cried out, "There goes a model!" And immediately Jubal imagined that he was a model, because he believed anything that anybody ever said to him, because he didn't know who or what he was. Presently he remembered his wife, and he decided to go and see her. He did go, but she had remarried again, for her second husband had gone abroad. Mr. Jubal grew very tired, and like all tired men, he felt a great yearning for his mother. He knew that she lived as a widow in a cottage in the mountains not too far from town, and so he went to see her. "Don't you know me?" he asked. "What's your name?" said the mother. "My name is your son's name. Don't you know it?" "My son's name was Peel. Yours is Jubal. I don't know Jubal." "You disowned me then, as you disowned your mother and yourself. Mother, why did you rob me of my will? You gave your will to a woman." "Well, it was the only way of winning her. I had to. But why, as a child, did you tell me that I had no will?" "Your father told you that," said the mother. "And you must forgive him, for he's dead now. Children, you see, are not supposed to have a will of their own. But grown-up people are. Now, listen to me, Gustave. Gustave Peel." And upon hearing his name from his mother's lips, he became himself again. All of the parts which he had played, the maestro and the model, the kings and the prophets, cut and ran. He was but the son of his mother. He laid his head on her knees and said, "Now, let me die here, for at last I am home."